Hi everyone! For the final installment of our shirt sewing tutorial, we'll be taking our sleeve and setting it into the armhole, as well as doing a shirt tail hem on the bottom edge. At that point, the shirt will be completely sewn and it'll be all ready for you to add buttons, buttonholes, and any further embellishments. Our next step will be pinning the sleeves into the armholes and sewing them in place. Before we do any pinning though, we have to be sure that we have the correct sleeve matched up with the correct armhole. So start with your shirt right side out with the front facing up. And then also have your sleeves right side out. But you want to take a look at your sleeve and take note of the front versus the back on the sleeve. If we look at this one, the placket is always located on the back portion of the sleeve, as well as the double notches up here at the top. So that tells me this is the back of the sleeve facing up. I'm going to flip it over so that the front is facing up. The front is the side of the sleeve that does not have the placket, and it has a single notch up here along the armhole seam. So with the front facing up, I can then match it up with the appropriate armhole. See, I could tell that when it's in this position, it will not get sewn onto this armhole because those don't line up and coordinate properly. So this one will go over here. And then with my other sleeve, I'll also have the front facing up, and I can see that it matches with this armhole. To start pinning the sleeve to the armhole, bring the sleeve over to meet it, and you want to just sort of open the shirt up and grab the sleeve to bring it up through the armhole, matching up those seam lines. In doing so, you could see that we've now positioned the sleeve and the shirt so that the right sides of the fabric will be together as we pin and sew them. The first point that we want to match up and pin is the underarm seam with the side seam. So match those seams and pin right at that spot. Next, at the top of the sleeve cap, you have a notch. It's a little triangular notch. And we want to match this notch up to the coordinating notch that is on the armhole. So match those little triangles together and pin there as well. There's two more sets of notches that we need to match up. On the front half of the sleeve, a couple inches up from the bottom of the armhole, you should have a pair of single notches on the front of the armhole that you will match and pin. And then coming around to the same location on the other side of the side seam, which is the back of the sleeve, you should have double notches on both the sleeve and the armhole. Match those and pin. So in pinning our sleeve in place, it's important to note that the section on the lower portion of the sleeve, from the single notch going past the side seam over to the double notch, the lengths of the two seams here are exactly the same. There's no excess fabric or ease along this portion of the armhole, but the opposite part, running from the single notch around the top of the cap and to the double notch at the back, for this portion, you will see that the sleeve is larger than the armhole. The whole purpose of those basting stitches that we put in are so that we can now pull the threads to help gently draw a little bit of that excess fabric inward. So we're going to pull those threads, pulling the excess inward until the measurement of the sleeve fits into the measurement of the armhole, and then we will pin it in place. So we'll look at this portion along the front of the sleeve, and I want to find my basting threads. Wrap them around your finger if need be. It kind of helps you get a good grip and pull them evenly. And then you just pinch the fabric right there and gently pull a little bit. Now, what we're doing here is not trying to create actual gathers. We don't want full-on folds happening. So we want to scooch that excess up. And your goal is to not have any actual folds in the fabric. You're just kind of coercing the excess inwards gently. And this is what helps create three-dimensional shape over the top of the shoulder. So I want to take that little bit of excess and be scooching it all the way up to the notch at the sleeve cap. And it's a very small amount, but I just want to spread that out, and the sleeve should start to sort of cup inwards a little bit. So even out the excess. And now it's looking pretty good. See how now the sleeve is kind of settling into the armhole measurement? So once you're sure that they're about the same length and your ease is evenly distributed, then you'll pin that section. So we'll come right to the middle of that area and pin, and then go halfway between these two and pin, and do the same thing halfway between these two and pin. And now we'll repeat that same process on the other portion of the sleeve with our excess. So we'll come to this end, grab the threads, gently pull, kind of scooch that excess all the way upwards towards the cap, and just spread it out evenly until the sleeve settles into the armhole. You may also want to come around to the bottom portion of the sleeve that doesn't have the excess and give yourself maybe 2 more pins. Between the side seam and the notch, we'll do 1 halfway pin here and another in the other section. It's kind of an awkward curve there, so it does help us out to have a couple more pins. Okay. So, once your armhole is thoroughly pinned, you're going to repeat the same pinning process on the other armhole, and then we'll be sewing both of these armhole seams at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Because it's a complete circle, we're going to be beginning and ending at the exact same spot, and that place that we start and finish at will be right here, where the side seam of the shirt meets the under seam. Basically, it's the bottom of the armhole. So we're going to start sewing our sleeve seam, and we're going to be sewing this at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Our starting point should be the bottom of the armhole at the side seam. So I'm going to get positioned right there. And for sewing a complete circle, some machines will have what they call a free arm that allows you to wrap a circular seam around the machine and dip below. But I usually still prefer to sew from inside the circle with the excess fabric coming up above where I'm sewing. So that's how I'm going to demonstrate this today. For sewing a complete circle, you usually don't have to backstitch both the beginning and the end because those occur at the exact same place. So to keep it clean and reduce excess thread bulk in that area, I usually choose to not backstitch at the very beginning. But then when we come full circle and finish, we're going to overlap where we started by a tiny bit, and we will backstitch at that point. So I'm just going to start off and come forward. 1/2 inch seam allowance. As we come around the sleeve cap where we have all of our excess that we tried to ease inwards, be careful of spots like this where it looks like you may sew over a little fold. So I'm just going to kind of ease that downward so that I don't catch any little tucks of fabric along this seam. So we're coming around to the beginning. I'm just going to overlap my first stitches by about 1/2 inch and then go reverse for a few. And you'll repeat the same process for the other armhole. After sewing your armhole seam, you'll then want to use the iron to press the seam allowances towards the sleeve itself. Pressing the seam allowances towards the sleeve helps to kind of fill out the sleeve cap a little more and give a fuller shape to the shoulder area. I'm going to use a sleeve board to do this. I just want to work my way around the armhole, feeling underneath that the seam allowance is going in the sleeve direction. The final step for our shirt, aside from buttons and buttonholes, will be the hem. We call this shape a shirt tail hem, where it dips down lower in the front and the back and scoops up a little bit at the sides. For doing a shirt tail hem, the best way is to do a rolled hem where we're folding the fabric upwards twice. It'll give us a clean finish, and we're going to keep those folds pretty small, about 1/4 of an inch. Whenever you have a curved shape on a hem, you can't really get away with doing a very wide hem without it puckering and buckling along the way. So by doing a 1/4 inch double folded hem, we'll be able to help our fabric contour along that curved edge a little bit better than we would with a wide hem. I'm going to start by drawing a line 1/4 of an inch up from the bottom edge all the way around. And I'm making this line on the right side of the fabric. We'll be using the iron to press that 1/4 inch excess upwards, so having it on the right side allows us to see it better as we're doing that pressing. So I'm just going to mark 1/4. This section is straight, but as we come around the curve, just kind of pivot your ruler to follow the shape. Now I'll flip it over, mark it on the back as well so that we have a continuous line all the way around. Starting from one end, we're going to be turning that 1/4 inch of excess upwards and pressing it in place. At the beginning and end here, where we're going over our facing, you'll notice that it's pretty thick in that area, but don't worry, we're going to come back and kind of trim a little bit of that excess away to reduce the bulkiness. So just kind of turning it up right on that 1/4 inch line, chasing my hand with the iron. And you want to really kind of flex the fabric to follow the curved shape as you go. To reduce some of the bulkiness around the facing area right here, we're going to be trimming the facing away for just this lower 1/4 inch up to the crease that we just made with the iron. We stitched our facing down all the way to the bottom, so for that very beginning portion, you may need to use your seam ripper to just kind of carefully pick a couple stitches away until it can lift away from the shirt front. Then come in with your shears, and near the center front edge, I'm clipping just the facing now. I'm going to cut right next to the understitch, right up to my fold. Then cut straight across so that you're trimming this 1/4 inch section of facing away. In doing so, we've now taken a whole extra 2 layers of fabric out, so it won't be as thick in that area, and we'll be able to fold our hem up right on top of it. Sometimes for a rolled hem, you may want to also use the iron to press the second fold in place, because we're going to be turning this upwards a second time, right where the current edge of the fabric is. So you're welcome to press that second fold if you like. However, on a curved hem, like the shirt tail one that we have here, I almost find you can kind of curve and contour and bend the fabric a little bit if we do it freestyle, which means we're going to be making that second fold at the sewing machine as we move along and just kind of letting the fabric speak to us across the curves. As we sew our hem, folded up the second time, we will be edge stitching along the upper fold. And we want to make sure that we don't catch any little puckers or folds along the way. Even though I'm mostly going to be folding this hem as I go, I've gone ahead and put a pin right in the very beginning to hold that in place. It tends to be a really thick, intricate little area that's really hard to keep positioned without having a pin in there. So I just have one pin right at the very beginning. We're going to work our way all the way down the hem, and as you can see down here, we only have our first fold pressed by the iron. So as you move along, you are going to be creating a second fold right where this edge of the fabric is. So it's getting flipped upwards a second time, and then you'll be edge stitching right along the upper fold here. So my pin is holding that double fold in place right at the beginning. I'm going to start with a back stitch, meaning I'm starting not at the very beginning, but a little ways down, so I can go in reverse first. Now, this is definitely a very thick area, and when you're right at the tippy top here, sometimes your machine may have problems advancing forward. So if that happens, a good trick is to grab your thread tails from the beginning of your seam and wrap them around your fingers so you have a good grip, and you can pull on them to kind of help your machine come forward just for those first few stitches. Once it gets its footing, then you can let go of the threads. As you fold, especially coming around the curves, you also want to be sure that your finished hem looks nice and even in its overall width. After sewing your hem, you'll still want to take the iron and go over it to give it a final press. Give it a little steam, and this will help reduce any sort of ripples that happen throughout the sewing process. At this stage, the sewing of our shirt is now complete, and it is ready for buttons and buttonholes, as well as any other further embellishments or finishing touches.